The stagecoach lurched to a stop in the middle of nowhere, and Eleanor Vale knew she'd made a terrible mistake. Through the frosted window, she saw him, a tall figure carved from winter itself, standing motionless against the white mountains. The driver leaned close and whispered, "That's Gideon Mercer. 4 women before you couldn't last a month with him. Town's got bets you'll be back by Sunday." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she forced them still. She'd burned every bridge to get here, sold everything she owned. There was no going back now, only forward, into the frozen silence of a man everyone said was impossible to reach. But will Eleanor become just another name on the list of women who tried and failed? Or will she discover the truth hidden beneath the mountain man's ice-cold exterior? Stay with us until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let's begin. The journey to Black Hollow had taken 3 weeks, each day colder than the last. Eleanor pressed her palm against the stagecoach window, watching her breath fog the glass. Outside, the world had transformed into something alien. Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky the color of old pewter, and snow fell in sheets so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. "You sure about this, ma'am?" The driver, a weathered man named Dutch, glanced back at her with something between pity and disbelief. "It ain't too late to turn around. We could have you back in Denver by week's end." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She couldn't blame him for asking. She'd heard the whispers at every stop along the way. At the first trading post, the woman selling provisions had actually laughed when Eleanor mentioned Gideon Mercer's name. At the second, a grizzled prospector had shaken his head and muttered something about another lamb to the slaughter. By the third stop, Eleanor had stopped mentioning where she was headed altogether. "I'm sure," she said finally, though her voice carried less conviction than she'd hoped. Dutch grunted. "Your funeral, I suppose. Though I'll tell you what I told the others, Mercer ain't a bad man, just a damn cold one. That ranch of his might as well be on the dark side of the moon for all the warmth you'll find there." The stagecoach hit a rut, and Eleanor's traveling bag slid across the seat. She caught it automatically, her fingers finding the worn leather strap. Everything she owned was in that bag now. She'd sold her boarding house in Philadelphia, paid off her debts, and bought a one-way ticket west with what remained. At 38 years old, with no family and fewer prospects, answering that advertisement for a ranch wife had seemed less like desperation and more like the only logical choice. Seeking capable woman for mountain ranch. Must be strong, practical, and unafraid of isolation. No romantic notions required. The bluntness of it had almost made her laugh. No romantic notions. Well, she certainly had none of those left. 2 failed engagements and a decade of watching other women's children for pennies had cured her of romance years ago. "We're here," Dutch announced, pulling the horses to a stop. Eleanor looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. They'd stopped at a crossroads, if you could call it that. One path disappeared into town, marked by the distant glow of lamplight and the faint sound of a piano. The other vanished into darkness, climbing up into the mountains where nothing but snow and silence waited. And standing at that crossroads, holding the reins of a massive dark horse, was Gideon Mercer. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and still as a statue. His face was half hidden beneath the brim of a black hat, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. He wore a heavy coat that had seen better years, and his gloved hands rested on the saddle horn with the kind of patience that suggested he could stand there all night without moving an inch. "That's him," Dutch said unnecessarily. "Last chance, ma'am." Eleanor straightened her spine. She'd come too far to retreat now. "Thank you for the journey, Mr. Dutch." She climbed down from the stagecoach before she could change her mind, her boots sinking into snow that came up past her ankles. The cold hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. She'd thought she understood winter in Philadelphia, but this was something else entirely. This was winter that wanted you dead. Gideon Mercer didn't move to help her. He just watched as she struggled with her bag, as Dutch tossed down her trunk with a sympathetic look. The stagecoach pulled away and the sound of wheels on snow faded until there was nothing but wind. "You Eleanor Vale?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Yes." She tried to sound confident. "You must be Mr. Mercer." "Gideon." He dismounted in one fluid motion, moved to her trunk without asking, and lifted it like it weighed nothing. He secured it to a pack horse she hadn't noticed standing in the shadows. "We got a 2-hour ride ahead. You know how to handle a horse?" "I've ridden before." "That ain't what I asked." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "I can manage." He studied her for a long moment, and she got her first real look at his face. He wasn't handsome. His features were too severe for that, too weathered. But there was something compelling about the stark lines of his face, the startling paleness of his eyes against his tanned skin. He looked like a man carved from the mountains themselves. "We'll see," he said finally, and walked to a second horse, a smaller mare with a gentle eye. "This is Willow. She's steady. Don't jerk the reins and she'll treat you right." He helped her mount, his hands impersonal and quick, then swung onto his own horse without another word. Eleanor gathered the reins, her fingers already numb inside her gloves, and followed him into the darkness. They rode in silence, complete, total silence. Eleanor tried to start a conversation 3 times in the first hour. "The mountains are beautiful." Gideon didn't respond. "How long have you had the ranch?" "Nothing." "The snow seems heavier here than—" "Save your breath. You'll need it." After that, Eleanor stopped trying. She focused on staying in the saddle, on keeping Willow following the dark shape of Gideon's horse ahead. The wind picked up, carrying snow that stung her exposed skin. Her feet went numb, then her hands, then her face. Just when she thought she couldn't bear another minute, couldn't stay upright another second, lights appeared in the distance. The ranch wasn't what she expected. She'd imagined something small, rough, a cabin, maybe, with a barn attached. Instead, she saw a sprawling 2-story house that must have been impressive once, before the mountains and weather got to it. The paint was peeling, shutters hung crooked, and one of the porch posts had a visible crack running through it. But it was large, solid, and next to it stood a massive barn that looked better maintained than the house itself. Gideon dismounted and immediately started unsaddling his horse. Eleanor climbed down from Willow with considerably less grace, her legs nearly giving out when her feet hit the ground. "Your room's upstairs, last door on the right," Gideon said, not looking at her. "Kitchen's in the back. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll be in the barn." "Can I help with—" "No." He led his horse toward the barn, the pack horse following. "Get inside before you freeze." Eleanor stood there, alone in the snow, watching him disappear into the barn. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt the full weight of what she'd done. She was alone on a mountain with a man she didn't know, in a place so remote that screaming wouldn't bring help. The nearest town was hours away, and she had no way to get there except on foot. She could run. She could turn around right now, start walking back toward Black Hollow, and maybe someone would take pity on her before she froze to death. Or she could go inside. Eleanor picked up her bag and climbed the porch steps. The door opened with a creak that sounded like a warning. The inside of the house was dark and cold. Not as cold as outside, but close. Eleanor fumbled along the wall until she found a lamp, managed to get it lit with shaking hands. The light revealed a front room that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs hung in the corners, and the furniture looked like it had been chosen purely for function without a thought for comfort. But it was the kitchen that truly shocked her. When she pushed through the door, lamp held high, she found a room that must have once been the heart of the home. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and next to it sat a real icebox, a luxury she hadn't expected. The counters were solid butcher block, worn smooth with use. Copper pots hung from hooks, and shelves lined the walls. Most of them empty now, but clearly built to hold provisions. Someone had loved this kitchen once. Someone had cooked here, had filled this room with warmth and the smell of bread and the sound of laughter. But that someone was long gone. Now the stove was cold, the counters dusty, and the only food in sight was a half-empty sack of flour and some jerked meat hanging from a beam. Eleanor set down her lamp and opened the stove. The firebox was clean but empty. She found wood stacked outside the back door and loaded the stove, her fingers clumsy with cold. It took 6 tries to get the fire started, and by the time flames finally caught, tears of frustration were freezing on her cheeks. But she got it burning. And as the warmth slowly began to fill the kitchen, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. A stubborn determination that had gotten her through 2 broken engagements, countless nights of loneliness, and the death of every dream she'd ever had. She hadn't come all this way to fail. She hadn't sold everything, hadn't traveled across half a continent to turn around at the first sign of difficulty. If Gideon Mercer wanted to test her, if he wanted to see how long she'd last, then she'd show him exactly what Eleanor Vale was made of. She found a kettle, filled it with snow from outside, and set it on the stove to boil. While she waited, she explored the rest of the downstairs. A dining room with a table that could seat 12, all the chairs pushed against the walls. A sitting room with furniture covered in dust sheets. A study with empty shelves and a desk covered in old ledgers. And everywhere, that same sense of abandonment. This had been a home once. Now it was just a place where a man came to sleep between days of work. Eleanor climbed the stairs, her lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The upstairs hallway had 5 doors, all closed. She found hers at the end, the room Gideon had mentioned. It was sparse but clean, with a bed that had been made with military precision, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dark mountains. She set down her bag and returned to the kitchen. The water was boiling now, and she found tea leaves in a tin that looked like it hadn't been opened in months. She made herself a cup, wrapped her hands around it for warmth, and sat at the kitchen table to wait. Gideon didn't come back to the house for 2 more hours. When he finally walked in, stamping snow from his boots, he stopped short at the sight of her sitting there. His eyes went from her face to the stove, now radiating heat, to the lamp she'd lit, to the cup of tea in her hands. "You should be asleep," he said. "I wanted to wait until you came in, to say goodnight." He stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he moved past her to the counter, poured himself a glass of water from the pump, and drank it standing up. "Breakfast is at dawn," he said, still not looking at her. "I'll be up before that, seeing to the animals. You don't need to cook for me. I've been managing fine on my own. I'd like to earn my keep. Suit yourself." He set down the glass and headed for the stairs. At the doorway, he paused. The other women lasted 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, and 4 days respectively. The town's got money on you being gone in less than 3, just so you know what you're up against. Eleanor met his eyes. "I'm not the other women." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or skepticism. "We'll see about that." He climbed the stairs, and a moment later she heard a door close. Eleanor sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the fire crackle in the stove and the wind howl outside the windows. She'd been tested before, by life, by loss, by the slow, grinding poverty of being a woman alone in the world. This would be no different. Gideon Mercer might be cold, might be distant, might be impossible to reach. But Eleanor had learned a long time ago that the hardest things were often the most worth doing. The next morning came hard and early. Eleanor woke to darkness and cold, the small fire she'd built in her room stove having burned out hours ago. She dressed quickly in the warmest clothes she had, which weren't nearly warm enough, and made her way downstairs. Gideon was already gone. She could see his tracks in the fresh snow leading to the barn, could hear the faint sounds of animals being fed. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, except someone had added more wood to the stove sometime during the night. Eleanor lit lamps, got the stove burning hot, and took stock of what she had to work with. The situation was worse than she'd thought. The icebox was nearly empty, just some eggs, a few strips of bacon, and a jar of preserves that looked homemade but old. The pantry held dried beans, more flour, salt, sugar, and not much else. This wasn't the kitchen of someone who ate well. This was the kitchen of someone who ate to survive and nothing more. She made coffee, fried eggs and bacon, and was setting the table when Gideon walked in. He stopped in the doorway, snowflakes melting on his shoulders, and stared at the spread she'd laid out. "What's this?" "Breakfast." "I told you. You told me you didn't need me to cook. You didn't tell me I couldn't." Eleanor poured coffee into 2 cups. "Sit down before it gets cold." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he hung his coat on the hook by the door and sat at the table. He ate like a man who'd forgotten what a proper meal tasted like, methodical and focused. Eleanor ate more slowly, watching him. "You have cattle," she said. Not a question. 100 head, mostly Herefords. "Chickens?" 20, give or take. Hawks got 3 last week. "A garden?" He looked up at that. "Used to, not anymore." "Why not?" "Because I'm running a ranch, not playing house." His voice was sharp, but Eleanor didn't flinch. A garden would give you vegetables, save money on supplies from town. Town's 3 hours each way. I go once a month whether I need to or not. That's enough. When's the last time you had fresh vegetables? He set down his fork. Mrs. Vale. Eleanor.
Mrs. Vale, he repeated, his jaw tight. I hired you because the lawyer said I needed to. State's got new laws about mail-order marriages. Said we have to live together for 6 months before it's legal. After that, you'll get your share of the ranch as we agreed, and you can do whatever you want with it. Sell it back to me. Keep it. I don't care. But for the next 6 months, you're here to satisfy the law. Nothing more. Don't go getting ideas about changing things. Eleanor absorbed this in silence. So that was it. She wasn't a wife. She was a legal requirement. A box to check on some government form. I see, she said quietly. And if I want to plant a garden anyway? Knock yourself out. Just don't expect me to care about it. He stood, carried his plate to the sink, and walked out without another word.
Eleanor sat at the table, her coffee going cold in her hands. She'd known this wouldn't be easy. She'd known she wasn't coming to a love story or a fairy tale. But hearing it said so plainly that she was nothing more than a legal inconvenience hit harder than she'd expected. She cleared the table, washed the dishes, and made a decision. If Gideon Mercer thought she was just going to sit in this house for 6 months and then disappear, he was wrong. She might not be able to change his mind about her, but she could damn well change this house. She spent the morning cleaning. She started in the kitchen, scrubbing every surface until her hands were raw. She found cleaning supplies in a cupboard that looked like they'd never been used, probably bought by one of the previous women who'd tried to make this place a home. By noon, the kitchen was spotless. The counters gleamed, the floor was clean, and the stove looked almost new again. Eleanor stood back and surveyed her work, feeling a small spark of satisfaction. She made herself lunch, just beans and bread, nothing fancy, and was eating at the newly cleaned table when she heard a sound outside. She went to the window and saw Gideon crossing from the barn to one of the outbuildings, carrying something large over his shoulder. He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of doing the same tasks alone. No wasted motion, no hesitation. But there was something lonely about it, too. Something that tugged at Eleanor's heart despite herself. She shook off the feeling and got back to work. The sitting room was next, and it took her 3 hours to uncover all the furniture, beat the dust from the cushions, and scrub the windows until she could see out of them. The room transformed before her eyes. What had been dreary and abandoned became almost welcoming. She was starting on the dining room when Gideon came back in. She heard him stop in the doorway of the sitting room, heard the silence that followed. "You've been busy," he said, and she couldn't tell if he was pleased or annoyed. The house needed it. The house is fine as it is. Eleanor turned to look at him, dustcloth in hand. The house is dying, Mr. Mercer, just like everything else around here. His face went hard. I don't recall asking for your opinion. You didn't have to ask. I have eyes. They stared at each other across the hallway, and Eleanor saw something dangerous flash in his expression. But she held her ground. She'd learned a long time ago that backing down never got you anywhere. Do what you want, he said finally. Just stay out of my way. He disappeared upstairs and she heard a door slam. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and got back to work. The pattern repeated for the next week. Gideon rose before dawn, worked until dark, came inside only to eat the meals Eleanor prepared. He spoke maybe 20 words a day, all of them functional. Pass the salt. More coffee. I'll be late tomorrow. But Eleanor was starting to notice things. Small things that told her more about Gideon Mercer than his silence ever could. He always made sure the wood box by the kitchen stove was full before he went to bed, even though he never said anything about it. He'd fixed the broken step on the back porch without her asking. And once, when she'd been struggling to move a heavy trunk in the upstairs hallway, she'd come back later to find it moved to exactly where she'd wanted it. He was watching her, noticing things, taking care of things in his own silent way. The town's predictions came and went. Sunday passed, then a full week, then 2 weeks. Eleanor stayed. She'd cleaned every room in the house except Gideon's. She didn't dare intrude on that private space. She organized the pantry, mended curtains, and fixed the broken shutters. She wrote a list of supplies they needed and left it on the kitchen table. And when Gideon made his monthly trip to town, he came back with everything she'd requested, plus a few things she hadn't. New fabric for curtains, a sack of sugar twice the size she'd asked for, and a small bag of peppermints that he set on the counter without comment. Eleanor found the peppermints after he'd gone to bed. She stood in the kitchen, holding the bag, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but it was the first time Gideon had acknowledged her as anything more than an obligation. She placed one of the peppermints in her mouth and smiled despite herself. The next morning, she found Gideon in the barn. He was mucking stalls, and he looked up sharply when she entered, clearly not expecting her. "I want to learn," she said without preamble. "Learn what?" "Whatever you'll teach me, how to care for the animals, how to mend fences, how this ranch works. If I'm going to be here for 6 months, I might as well be useful." He leaned on his pitchfork, studying her. "This ain't easy work." "I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for purpose." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but something less harsh. "Can you handle a pitchfork?" "I can learn." He handed her his and picked up another from the wall. "Then start with that stall there. And when you're done with that, there's 19 more." Eleanor took the pitchfork and got to work. Within 10 minutes, her arms were aching. Within 30, she was sweating despite the cold. By the time she'd finished the first stall, her back was screaming and her hands were blistered. Gideon finished his 5th stall and looked over at her. "You can quit any time." Eleanor stabbed the pitchfork into the hay pile and started on the 2nd stall. They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, and when Eleanor finally stumbled back to the house at noon, she could barely lift her arms. But she'd done it. She'd kept up, hadn't complained, hadn't quit. That evening, Gideon came in for dinner to find her soaking her hands in warm salt water, trying to ease the pain of the blisters. "You should wear gloves tomorrow," he said, sitting down at the table. "I didn't bring work gloves." He disappeared and came back with a pair of worn leather gloves. "These were my father's. They'll be too big, but they'll work until we can get you proper ones." Eleanor took the gloves, feeling the soft leather, still warm from wherever he'd kept them. "Thank you." He just nodded and started eating. But that night, as Eleanor lay in bed with her aching muscles and burning hands, she found herself smiling into the darkness. It wasn't much. A pair of old gloves, a few words more than usual. But it was something. It was progress.
3 weeks into her stay, Eleanor finally asked the question she'd been holding back. They were eating dinner, venison stew she'd made from meat Gideon had brought in from hunting, and the silence had stretched long enough that she felt brave. "Why did you send for a wife if you didn't want one?" Gideon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully and looked at her with those pale eyes that always seemed to see too much. "Who said I didn't want one?" "You did. Everything about the way you act says you don't want anyone here." "What I want and what I need aren't always the same thing." He pushed his stew around his plate. "The ranch is too much for one man. I need help, and ranch hands cost money I don't have. A wife was practical. That's the coldest reason for marriage I've ever heard." "You want me to lie to you? To pretend this is something it's not?" Eleanor met his eyes. "No, I want you to be honest, but I also want to know why you're so determined to keep me at arm's length. Because that's easier." "Easier than what?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Then the alternative." He walked out, leaving his dinner half finished on the table. Eleanor sat in the silence he left behind, thinking about those words. Then the alternative. What alternative? Letting her in? Trusting her? Actually having a partner instead of just a hired hand with a marriage certificate? She cleaned up the dishes and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake listening to the wind howl outside her window, thinking about a man who'd built walls so high he didn't even know how to tear them down. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sounds she didn't recognize, panicked lowing from the barn, and Gideon's voice raised in a way she'd never heard before. She threw on clothes and ran outside without even grabbing her coat. In the barn, she found chaos. One of the cows was down, clearly in distress, and Gideon was beside her, his hands bloody, his face tight with concentration. "What's wrong?" Eleanor gasped. "Breech birth. Calf's stuck." He didn't look up. "I need... Tell me what to do." He did look up then, surprise flashing across his face. "This isn't..."
"Tell me what to do, Gideon." Maybe it was the use of his first name, or maybe it was the tone of her voice, but something made him nod. "Hold her head. Keep her calm. Talk to her if you have to. Just keep her from thrashing." Eleanor moved to the cow's head, placed her hands on the animal's neck, and started talking. She didn't know what she was saying, nonsense mostly, soothing sounds and gentle words, but the cow seemed to respond, her wild eyes focusing on Eleanor's face. Gideon worked with a gentleness Eleanor hadn't expected. His hands, which could be so rough with the world, were careful and sure with the struggling mother. He spoke to the cow too, his voice low and reassuring. "Come on, girl. You can do this. Just a little more." Eleanor watched him, watched the concentration on his face, the way his jaw clenched with effort, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. This was a man who cared, deeply, fiercely, even if he didn't know how to show it to people. Finally, with a sound that was half grunt, half cry, Gideon pulled the calf free. For a terrible moment, it lay still, and Eleanor's heart stopped. Then the calf shuddered, took a gasping breath, and let out a weak cry. The mother immediately tried to rise, and Gideon moved back, letting her tend to her baby. Eleanor watched, tears streaming down her face without her permission, as the cow began to lick her calf clean. "You did it," she whispered. Gideon didn't respond. He was staring at his hands, covered in blood and birth, and his expression was unreadable. Then, without warning, he stood and walked out of the barn. Eleanor found him 10 minutes later, standing behind the building, his shoulders shaking. She approached slowly, unsure, and when he turned to look at her, she saw tears on his face. "I thought I was going to lose them both," he said, his voice rough. "The last breech birth, I lost them both. I couldn't—" He broke off, and before Eleanor could think better of it, she stepped forward and pulled him into her arms. He stiffened immediately, and she thought he would pull away. But then, slowly, his arms came around her, and he held on like a drowning man finding solid ground. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, while the sun rose over the mountains and turned the snow gold. When Gideon finally stepped back, he wouldn't meet her eyes. "I should check on them, make sure they're both stable." "Gideon," Eleanor said softly. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you for letting me help." He nodded once and walked back into the barn. Eleanor stood in the snow, her heart beating too fast, her mind spinning. Something had shifted this morning, something fundamental and irreversible. She'd seen past the walls, had glimpsed the man Gideon kept locked away from the world, and what she'd seen had taken her breath away. The rest of that day, Gideon was quieter than usual, if that was possible. But when Eleanor brought him lunch in the barn, he actually said thank you. And that night, when they sat down to dinner, he asked her how her day had been. It was a small thing, a normal thing that happened in normal households every night. But coming from Gideon, it felt like a gift. "It was good," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I finished mending all the curtains, and I was thinking about the garden. Come spring, we could—" She caught herself, but it was too late. His expression had shuttered closed again. "There's no we in this, Mrs. Vale. 6 months, remember? Then you're free to go." "And if I don't want to go?" The words were out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like smoke. Gideon stood, his dinner barely touched. "Then you'd be making a mistake." He left her sitting alone at the table, and Eleanor felt the familiar ache of rejection settle into her bones. But this time, it was different. This time, she'd seen the truth. Gideon wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care. He was pushing her away because he did. And that changed everything. The storm came 3 days later, rolling down from the mountains like the end of the world. Eleanor had seen winter storms before, but nothing like this. The sky turned the color of old iron, and the wind howled with a voice that sounded almost human. By the time Gideon came running from the barn, shouting for her to help him secure the livestock, snow was already falling so thick she could barely see him through the kitchen window. She grabbed her coat and ran outside, the wind nearly knocking her off her feet. Gideon was already at the chicken coop, fighting to get the door closed against the gale. "The cattle!" he shouted over the wind. "We need to get them into the lower pasture, closer to the barn. If they scatter in this, we'll lose half the herd." Eleanor had never herded cattle in her life, but there wasn't time to argue. She followed Gideon into the field, snow stinging her face like needles, and did her best to help drive the panicked animals toward shelter.
The cows were terrified, eyes rolling white, fighting every step. One of them broke away and ran, and Eleanor chased after it without thinking, her boots slipping in the deepening snow. "Mrs. Vale, no!" Gideon's voice was distant, swallowed by the storm.
But Eleanor had already caught up to the cow, placing herself in front of it, arms spread wide. The animal stopped, snorting and stamping, and for a terrible moment Eleanor thought it would charge right through her. Then Gideon was there, grabbing the cow's halter, his other hand gripping Eleanor's arm hard enough to bruise. "Don't ever do that again," he said through gritted teeth. "You could have been killed. She would have died out here. Better her than you." The words hung between them for just a second before the wind tore them away. Gideon pulled the cow toward the others, and Eleanor followed, her heart hammering in her chest from more than just exertion. It took them another hour to get all the cattle secured, and by the time they stumbled back to the house, they were both half frozen. Eleanor's fingers wouldn't work properly, and she fumbled with the door handle until Gideon reached past her and opened it. Inside, she collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Gideon moved immediately to the stove, building up the fire until heat began to fill the kitchen. Then he knelt in front of her and started unlacing her boots. "I can do it," Eleanor protested weakly. "Your hands are blue. Let me." He pulled off her boots and socks, and Eleanor gasped when she saw her feet. They were white and waxy, completely numb. Gideon disappeared and came back with a basin of cool water. "This is gonna hurt," he warned, and lowered her feet into the water. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Eleanor bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, but a whimper escaped anyway. Gideon's jaw clenched, and he kept his hands on her ankles, holding her feet in the water even as she tried instinctively to pull away. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it hurts. But we have to warm them slowly, or you'll lose toes." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but she nodded and gripped the sides of the chair, enduring it. Gradually, agonizingly, feeling returned to her feet. The white patches turned pink, then red, and finally normal color. Throughout it all, Gideon stayed kneeling in front of her, his hands steady on her ankles. When it was over, he dried her feet carefully with a towel and looked up at her. "You were brave out there. Stupid, but brave. I wasn't going to let her die. You barely know how to handle cattle, and you ran after a 1,000-pound animal in a blizzard. That's not brave, Mrs. Vale. That's reckless." Eleanor met his eyes. She was scared. "I know what that feels like." Something in his expression softened. He stood and moved to the counter, started making coffee without another word. Eleanor watched him, noticing for the first time how his own hands shook slightly as he worked. He'd been scared too. Scared for her, she realized with a jolt. The coffee helped, warming her from the inside. They drank it in silence while the storm raged outside, the wind rattling the windows and piling snow against the walls. By the time darkness fell, the house was completely buried. When Eleanor looked out the window, all she could see was white. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be days. Could be a week." Gideon stared into his coffee. "We're snowed in. No way to get to town. No way for anyone to reach us. Hope you're not claustrophobic." "I'll manage." "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eleanor saw confusion in his eyes. "Why are you still here? You could have left a dozen times by now. Could have asked me to take you back to town. Could have walked out during one of my supply runs, but you didn't. Why?" Eleanor set down her cup. "Because I don't give up on things just because they're hard. This isn't a thing, Mrs. Vale. This is your life. 6 months in the middle of nowhere with a man who barely talks to you. That's not hard. That's hell." "Is it hell for you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What?" "Having me here. Is it hell for you, or are you just trying to convince yourself it is?" Gideon stood abruptly, carried his cup to the sink. "I'm going to check the animals one more time before the snow gets too deep. Don't wait up." He grabbed his coat and walked out into the storm before Eleanor could respond. She sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the wind scream, and wondered if she'd pushed too hard. But when Gideon came back an hour later, covered in snow and half-frozen himself, he didn't go straight to bed. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table where Eleanor was darning socks by lamplight. "My mother left when I was 8, he said without preamble. "Just walked out one morning and never came back. My father spent the rest of his life trying to understand why. and it killed him. Worked himself to death trying to make this ranch successful enough that maybe she'd come back. She never did. Eleanor set down her darning needle. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But his voice was rough, and Eleanor knew it wasn't as far in the past as he pretended. Point is, I learned early that people leave, women especially, this ranch, this life. It's too hard, too lonely. 4 women before you prove that. I'm not them. No, you're not. You're tougher than they were, I'll give you that. But winter's just started, Mrs. Vale. Wait until you've been snowed in for weeks, until the walls start closing in and the silence drives you half crazy. Wait until spring seems like it'll never come. Then we'll see how tough you really are. He stood and walked toward the stairs, but paused with his hand on the railing. I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm trying to be realistic. This place breaks people. I'd rather you left now with some dignity than have it break you too. Eleanor watched him climb the stairs, heard his bedroom door close. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, thinking about a boy whose mother abandoned him, and a man who'd spent his whole life expecting everyone else to do the same. No wonder he kept everyone at arm's length. It was easier than risking that kind of pain again. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of being trapped inside while the wind howled and the snow piled higher and higher against the walls. Eleanor had thought she understood isolation before, but this was something else entirely. The world outside ceased to exist. There was just the house, the barn, and the endless white. Gideon made trips to tend the animals twice a day, disappearing into the whiteout and coming back covered in ice. Eleanor kept the stove burning, cooked what meals she could with their dwindling supplies, and tried not to go stir-crazy. On the 3rd day, she found a chess set in the study and brought it to the kitchen table. That evening, when Gideon came in from the barn, she had it set up and waiting. You play? She asked. He looked at the board like it was a trap. It's been years. Then you're due for a game. He almost refused. She could see it in his face. But then he hung up his coat, sat down across from her, and moved a pawn. They played in silence at first, the only sounds, the click of pieces on the board, and the crackling of the fire. Eleanor won the first game, and Gideon's eyebrows rose. Lucky, he muttered. Want to go again? They played 3 more games. Eleanor won 2, Gideon won 1, and by the end of the 4th game, something had shifted. The silence between them felt different, less hostile, more comfortable. Where'd you learn to play like that? Gideon asked, resetting the board. My father taught me. He said chess was good for teaching patience and strategy. Eleanor smiled at the memory. I think he just liked beating me. He any good? The best I've ever played. Until now. Gideon looked up sharply, and Eleanor thought she saw the ghost of a smile cross his face. You saying I'm good, or you saying you let me win that last one? I'm saying you're better than you remember. They played until the lamp oil ran low, and when Eleanor finally stood to go to bed, Gideon stood too. Mrs. Vale, he said, and she turned. Eleanor, thank you for the games. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and hearing it in his rough voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. You're welcome. Same time tomorrow? Yeah, same time tomorrow. The next day, Eleanor was reading in the sitting room when she heard an odd sound from upstairs. It took her a moment to place it. Someone was playing a harmonica. The melody was slow and melancholy, and it seemed to match the storm outside perfectly. She climbed the stairs quietly and stood in the hallway, listening. The music was coming from Gideon's room, and it was beautiful in a raw, untrained way. He played for nearly an hour, and Eleanor stood in the cold hallway the entire time, mesmerized. When the music stopped, she hurried back downstairs before he could catch her eavesdropping. But that night at dinner, she asked, Will you play for me sometime? The harmonica? Gideon's fork froze halfway to his mouth. You heard that? I did. It was beautiful. It's just noise, something to pass the time. It didn't sound like noise to me. He didn't respond, just kept eating. But the next evening, after their chess game, he pulled the harmonica from his pocket and played. Not long, just 2 songs, but it was enough. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened, and for a little while the storm outside didn't seem quite so fierce. On the 5th day, the wind finally died. The silence when it stopped was almost deafening. Gideon immediately went out to assess the damage, and Eleanor followed. The world had been transformed. Snow drifts reached nearly to the roof of the barn, and everything was buried under feet of white. "It'll take days to dig out," Gideon said, surveying the damage. "And that's if another storm doesn't hit." But he didn't sound discouraged. If anything, he sounded energized, ready for the challenge. They spent the rest of that day digging paths between the house, the barn, and the other outbuildings. Eleanor's back screamed in protest, but she kept working, matching Gideon shovel for shovel. That night, they were both too exhausted to play chess. They sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence, Eleanor mending clothes while Gideon went over his ranch ledgers. At one point, Eleanor looked up and found him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing, just, you're still here. Where else would I be? I don't know. I just keep expecting to wake up and find you gone." Eleanor set down her needle. "I told you before, I don't give up on things. That includes this ranch. And it includes you. You shouldn't waste your time on me, Eleanor. I'm a lost cause." "No, you're not. You're just scared." His jaw tightened. "I'm not scared of anything. Everyone's scared of something. You're scared of letting people in because you think they'll leave. But shutting everyone out isn't protecting you, Gideon. It's just making you lonely." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I've spent most of my life alone watching other people build the lives I wanted. I know exactly what loneliness looks like, and I see it in you every day." Gideon stood so fast his chair tipped backward. "You've been here less than a month. Don't pretend you know me." "Then let me know you. Stop pushing me away and let me in." "Why? So you can leave like everyone else? So I can get used to having you here and then watch you walk away when the 6 months are up?" "I'm not going to leave." "You don't know that. You can't promise that." Eleanor stood too, facing him across the table. "You're right. I can't promise I'll stay forever because I don't know what the future holds. But I can promise I'm not leaving now. I can promise I'm here, I'm trying, and I'm not going anywhere just because things are hard." They stared at each other, the air between them electric with tension. Then Gideon grabbed his coat and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Eleanor sank back into her chair, shaking. She'd pushed too hard again, said too much. But it was the truth, and she was tired of dancing around it. Tired of pretending this was just a business arrangement when it had stopped being that weeks ago. She didn't know when it had happened. Maybe that first morning in the barn. Maybe the night he'd given her his father's gloves. Maybe during the storm when he'd warmed her frozen feet with such gentle care. But somewhere along the way, Eleanor had stopped thinking of this as a 6-month obligation and started thinking of it as something real. And that terrified her almost as much as it clearly terrified Gideon. He didn't come back to the house for hours. Eleanor went to bed eventually, but she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening for his footsteps, and finally heard the door open sometime after midnight. She heard him move around downstairs, heard water running in the kitchen, heard his heavy tread on the stairs. His footsteps paused outside her door. Eleanor held her breath, waiting. But after a long moment, she heard him walk to his own room and close the door. The next morning was awkward. They moved around each other in the kitchen like strangers, speaking only when necessary. The easy comfort they'd built during the storm had evaporated, replaced by tension thick enough to cut. Eleanor made breakfast, and they ate in silence. Gideon went to tend the animals, and Eleanor started on the day's chores. She was scrubbing the floor in the sitting room when she heard a crash from outside, followed by a shout of pain. She ran outside to find Gideon on the ground near the barn, his leg trapped under a fallen beam. The weight of the snow had weakened the structure, and when he'd tried to clear the roof, part of it had given way. "Don't just stand there," he grunted through clenched teeth. "Help me get this off." Eleanor grabbed one end of the beam, but it was impossibly heavy. She pulled with all her strength, managed to lift it maybe an inch. Gideon pulled his leg free with a gasp of pain, and then collapsed back in the snow. His pants were torn, and blood was already soaking through the fabric. Eleanor knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she carefully rolled up the pant leg. The gash was deep, running from his knee almost to his ankle. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Don't know. Haven't tried yet." "Let me help you." She got her shoulder under his arm and helped him stand. He tried to put weight on the injured leg and nearly went down again. Eleanor caught him, bracing herself against his weight. "Lean on me. We'll go slow." They made it to the house one painful step at a time. Eleanor got him into a kitchen chair and then ran to get clean water, bandages, anything she could find to treat the wound. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she cleaned the blood away, trying to see how bad it really was. "You need stitches," she said. "Can you do it?" "I've never stitched anything but fabric. Same principle. Needle, thread, pull it closed." He was trying to sound casual, but his face was white with pain. "There's a medical kit in the pantry, top shelf." Eleanor found the kit, found the curved needle and catgut thread inside. She sterilized the needle in the lamp flame, threaded it with shaking fingers, and looked at Gideon. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts, just do it." She did the first stitch, and Gideon's entire body went rigid, but he didn't make a sound. Eleanor worked as quickly as she could, trying to ignore the way his hands gripped the chair arms hard enough to make the wood creak. By the time she tied off the last stitch, tears were streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Not your fault." His voice was rough. "You did good, Eleanor. Real good." She bandaged the wound carefully and then helped him upstairs to his room. It was the first time she'd been inside, and she tried not to look around too much. But she caught glimpses. A simple bed, neatly made. A trunk at the foot of it. A small table with a lamp and an old photograph in a frame. She got him into bed, propped his leg up on pillows, and brought him water and laudanum from the medical kit. "I'll check on the animals," she said. "Eleanor, no, you don't know how, Then you'll have to tell me, because you're not going anywhere on that leg for at least a week." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the laudanum was already making his eyes heavy. The cows just need hay and water. Chickens need feed and their eggs collected. Don't try to muck the stalls, just make sure everyone's alive and has what they need. "I can do that." "Be careful." "I will." She made it to the door before he spoke again. "Eleanor?" She turned. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not leaving me out there. I told you, I don't give up on things." His eyes were already closing. "I'm starting to believe that." Eleanor spent the next 3 days running the ranch alone. She fed the cattle, collected eggs, hauled water, and checked on Gideon every few hours. The wound was healing clean, but he was feverish the first night, delirious and calling out for someone named Sarah. Eleanor sat beside his bed, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, and listened to him talk. Most of it didn't make sense. Fragments of memories, conversations with people who weren't there. But one thing came through clearly. He was lonely. So desperately, achingly lonely that it broke Eleanor's heart to hear. By the third day, the fever broke. Gideon woke up clear-headed but weak and found Eleanor asleep in the chair beside his bed. He watched her for a long moment before reaching out and gently touching her hand. She woke with a start. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a horse, but better." He looked at her closely. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "Eleanor, when's the last time you slept in a real bed?" She didn't answer, and he sighed. "You've been taking care of me. Someone had to. You should have just let me handle it." "With what? Your incredible ability to walk on a shredded leg?" She stood, started adjusting his pillows unnecessarily. "The animals are fine, by the way. I haven't burned the place down yet." "I wasn't worried about that." "No, you should be. I nearly set the hay on fire yesterday trying to figure out your lamp system." Despite himself, Gideon smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his entire face. Eleanor stopped fussing with the pillows and stared. "What?" he asked. "You smiled. I don't think I've ever seen you do that before." The smile faded. "Haven't had much reason to." "Maybe you should find more reasons." She left before he could respond, went downstairs to start on the day's work. But all morning she kept thinking about that smile, about the way it had changed him from something carved from stone into someone almost boyish. That evening, she brought dinner up to his room on a tray. Gideon tried to protest, said he could make it downstairs, but Eleanor wouldn't hear of it. "Eat," she commanded, "and don't argue with me. You're bossy when you're worried. I'm not worried. Your hands are shaking." Eleanor set down the tray harder than necessary. "Fine. I'm worried. You lost a lot of blood, you had a fever, and you're being stubborn about resting. So yes, I'm worried. Is that what you want to hear?" Gideon caught her wrist as she turned to leave.
His grip was gentle, but it stopped her cold. "I'm sorry. I'm not used to anyone caring whether I live or die." "Well, get used to it." She pulled free and left before he could see the tears in her eyes. Downstairs, she leaned against the kitchen counter and tried to get her breathing under control. This was getting complicated. She was getting in too deep, caring too much. Gideon had made it clear this was temporary, that after 6 months they'd go their separate ways. But Eleanor's heart hadn't gotten that message. Over the next few days, Gideon's leg healed enough for him to move around with a crutch Eleanor fashioned from an old broom handle. He insisted on helping with chores, and they fell into a new rhythm, working side by side, talking more than they had before. One afternoon, Eleanor was in the barn trying to calm a skittish calf when she heard Gideon's voice, low and soothing. She peered around the stall door and froze. Gideon was in the next stall with the calf from the breech birth, the one they'd saved together. The animal was trembling, clearly frightened by something, and Gideon was kneeling beside it despite his injured leg. His hands moved over the calf's body with extraordinary gentleness, and he was speaking to it in a voice Eleanor had never heard him use. "Easy now. You're all right. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here. You're safe." The calf gradually calmed under his touch, its shaking subsiding. Gideon stayed with it until it was completely settled, then carefully stood and turned to leave. That's when he saw Eleanor watching. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Eleanor stepped into the aisle, her heart in her throat. "You're kind," she said softly. "Under all that coldness, you're one of the kindest people I've ever met." Gideon's expression shuddered. "Don't." "Don't what? Tell the truth? Don't make me into something I'm not. You're seeing what you want to see." Eleanor walked closer. "No. I'm seeing what you try to hide. You're gentle with the animals. You fixed that broken step without being asked. You gave me your father's gloves. You played music for me because you knew I needed it. Those aren't the actions of a cold man, Gideon. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." He leaned against the stall, suddenly looking exhausted. "My father taught me to care for the animals. Said they were the only things that wouldn't betray you, wouldn't leave. People will hurt you every time, but animals, they're honest. You know where you stand. That's a lonely way to live. It's a safe way to live." Eleanor moved closer still, close enough to see the conflict in his eyes. "Safe isn't the same as happy. I stopped expecting happy a long time ago. Maybe it's time to start expecting it again." She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched his face. Gideon jerked back like she'd burned him. "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't do that." "Why not?" "Because I can't." He broke off, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "In 3 months, you're going to leave. And if I let you in, if I let myself feel something, it's going to destroy me when you go. I can't survive that again." Eleanor's heart broke for him. "I'm not your mother, Gideon. I'm not her, and I'm not the women who came before. I'm me. And I'm telling you right now that I don't want to leave." "You say that now, but winter's not even half over. Wait until... Stop telling me what I'm going to feel. Stop deciding for me when I'm going to break." Her voice echoed in the barn, startling both of them. "I'm here. I'm staying. And I'm not going to keep apologizing for caring about you." She turned and walked out before he could see her cry. Behind her, she heard Gideon punch the stall door, heard him curse, heard the raw frustration in his voice, but she kept walking. That night, neither of them spoke at dinner. The silence was heavy, weighted with everything unsaid. Eleanor went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional whiplash, and tried not to think about the look on Gideon's face when she'd touched him. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Soft music drifting up through the floorboards. Gideon was playing the harmonica again, but this time the melody was different. Less melancholy, more hopeful. Like something was changing, breaking open. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened until the music stopped, and even then she felt its echo in her chest. The music stopped abruptly, and Eleanor heard footsteps on the stairs. She held her breath, wondering if Gideon would knock on her door, but the footsteps passed by and his bedroom door closed with a soft click. She lay in the darkness for a long time after that, listening to the house settle around her, feeling the weight of everything that had gone unsaid between them. Morning came too early. Eleanor woke to gray light filtering through her window and the sound of movement downstairs. She dressed quickly and went down to find Gideon already making coffee, his crutch leaning against the counter. "You should still be resting that leg," she said. "It's healing fine." He didn't look at her. "I can handle morning chores now. You don't need to keep doing everything." "I don't mind helping." "I know, but I need to pull my weight around here." He poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the table for her. "Eleanor, about yesterday, we don't have to talk about it." "Yes, we do." He finally met her eyes. "I was wrong. The way I spoke to you, the things I said. You've done nothing but help me since you got here, and I keep throwing it back in your face." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "You're protecting yourself. I understand that. Understanding it doesn't make it right." Gideon sat down across from her, and Eleanor could see the exhaustion in his face. "I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. My father raised me to be self-sufficient, to not need anyone. And after what happened with my mother, after watching him destroy himself waiting for someone who was never coming back, I swore I'd never let myself get that vulnerable. What happened to her? Your mother?" Gideon stared into his coffee for a long moment. "I don't know. She just left one morning when I was 8. Packed a bag while my father was out working and walked away. Didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. I came home from checking the fence line, and she was just gone." Eleanor's heart ached at the image of a small boy coming home to find his mother vanished. "Did you ever try to find her?" "My father did. Spent years looking, writing letters, asking in every town within 100 miles. Nothing. It was like she vanished off the face of the earth." He rubbed his jaw, and Eleanor saw the old pain there. He never recovered from it. Spent the rest of his life wondering what he'd done wrong, what he could have done differently. Worked himself into an early grave trying to make this ranch into something she might come back to. "How old were you when he died?" 17. Heart gave out one winter morning while he was feeding the cattle. Found him in the snow, still holding a bucket of feed. Gideon's voice was flat, emotionless, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. He died still loving her, still waiting. And I promised myself I'd never be that pathetic. "That's not pathetic," Eleanor said softly. "That's love. That's weakness. Love makes you weak, makes you vulnerable. It gives people power over you, and they always use it to hurt you in the end." "Not always." Gideon looked at her then, really looked at her. "You've been hurt too. I can see it in your eyes. So why do you still believe in all this?" Eleanor took a breath. "Because the alternative is living half a life. My father died when I was 16, left me and my mother with nothing. She remarried within a year to a man who barely tolerated me. I left as soon as I could, moved to Philadelphia, thought I'd make a life there. Got engaged twice. First one called it off when he found out I couldn't have children. Second one left me for a woman 10 years younger with better prospects. I'm sorry." "Don't be. They did me a favor. Both of them would have made me miserable." She met his eyes. "But those failures didn't make me stop believing that somewhere out there might be something real, something worth fighting for." "And you think this is it? This ranch, this arrangement, me?" "I think it could be, if you'd let it." Gideon stood abruptly, grabbed his crutch. "I need to check on the cattle." "Your leg is fine. I'll be back for lunch." He left before Eleanor could argue, and she sat alone in the kitchen feeling like she'd pushed him away again. But what else could she do? Keep pretending this was just a business arrangement? Keep lying to herself about what she was starting to feel? She spent the morning cleaning, throwing herself into work to avoid thinking. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, organized cupboards that didn't need organizing. By the time Gideon came back for lunch, she had the kitchen spotless and a stew simmering on the stove. They ate in tense silence. Eleanor was loading the dishpan when Gideon spoke. "Her name was Sarah." Eleanor turned. "What?" "My mother. Her name was Sarah." He was staring at his empty bowl. "I heard myself calling for her when I was fevered. You must have heard it too." "I did. She used to sing while she cooked, made up songs about whatever she was making. My father would come in from the fields and just stand in the doorway watching her, this look on his face like he couldn't believe his luck." Gideon's voice was distant, lost in memory. "This kitchen used to be full of light, full of her. And then, one day it wasn't, and it's been dark ever since." Eleanor moved to sit across from him. "What was she like?" "I barely remember anymore. I have these fragments. Her laugh, the way she smelled like lavender, how she'd braid my hair when it got too long. But they're fading. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just making them up, if she was ever really here at all. She was here. This whole house remembers her.
Gideon finally looked up. The 4 women who came before you, they all tried to make this place into something it's not. Tried to bring light back into these rooms, but you can't resurrect something that's been dead for 30 years. I'm not trying to resurrect anything. I'm trying to build something new. Why? Why does it matter to you? Eleanor chose her words carefully. Because I spent 15 years living in other people's houses, taking care of other people's children, watching other people build the lives I wanted. I'm tired of being a ghost in someone else's story. I want my own life, Gideon, my own home. And when I saw your advertisement, something in me recognized something in you. 2 people who'd given up on finding anything real. So this is about you being desperate.
No, this is about me being honest. I came here for practical reasons, yes, but I've stayed for different ones. Don't say it. Why not? Because you're afraid to hear it, or afraid you might feel the same way? Gideon stood so fast his chair tipped over. You don't know what I feel.
Then tell me. I feel terrified. The words burst out of him like they'd been held back too long. I feel terrified because every morning I wake up and you're still here, and every night I go to bed wondering if tomorrow will be the day you realize what a mistake you've made. I'm terrified because I'm starting to need you here, and needing someone means they can destroy you when they leave. Eleanor stood too, her heart racing. I'm not going to leave. You can't know that. People always leave. My mother left. My father left by dying. Every woman who's ever set foot in this house left. Why would you be any different? Because I'm falling in love with you, you stubborn fool. The words hung in the air between them, huge and undeniable. Gideon stared at her like she'd struck him, his face pale. No, he said. No, you're not. You're lonely and this place is getting to you, but that's not love. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. Eleanor, please. His voice broke on her name. Please don't do this. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder for who? For you? She moved closer. You think pushing me away is protecting yourself, but all you're doing is making sure you'll always be alone. Maybe I deserve to be alone. Why? Because your mother left? That wasn't your fault, Gideon. You were a child. It doesn't matter whose fault it was. She looked at this life, looked at me, and decided it wasn't enough. Decided I wasn't enough. And there it was, the wound at the center of everything, an 8-year-old boy who'd internalized his mother's abandonment as proof of his own unworthiness. Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes. You were enough. You are enough. She left because of her own reasons, her own pain, not because of anything you did or didn't do. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I see you, Gideon. I see how gentle you are with the animals, how hard you work, how much you care even when you pretend not to. I see a good man who's been hurt and is too scared to risk being hurt again. But shutting yourself off from everything, that's not living, that's just surviving. Gideon turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. You should have left weeks ago. Should have run the first time I was cruel to you. But I didn't, and I'm not going to. Why are you so stubborn? Because I recognize myself in you. We're the same, you and me. Both of us so used to being alone that we don't know how to let someone in. But I'm trying, Gideon. I'm here. I'm trying. And all I'm asking is for you to try too. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how. Eleanor moved to stand behind him, close but not touching. Start small. Stop pushing me away when I get too close. Stop running every time we have a real conversation. Stop treating me like I'm going to disappear if you blink. And if I can't, if I'm too broken to be what you need, then we'll figure it out together, but you have to let me in first. Gideon turned to face her, and Eleanor saw something crumbling in his expression. The walls he'd built so high, so carefully, were finally starting to crack. I'm scared, he admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice made Eleanor's breath catch. I know. So am I. What if I let you in, and you realize there's nothing worth staying for? Eleanor reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she took his hand.
What if you let me in, and I never want to leave?
His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment they just stood there, holding on to each other in the quiet kitchen. Then Gideon pulled his hand away and stepped back. "I need time," he said. "I need to think. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. "Eleanor, thank you for not giving up on me." Then he was gone, and Eleanor sank into a chair, her hands shaking. She'd laid everything bare, said all the things she'd been holding back, and now all she could do was wait and see if it had been enough. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. Eleanor tried to keep busy, but her mind kept returning to Gideon's face when she'd told him she was falling in love with him. The fear there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like hope. When Gideon didn't come back for dinner, Eleanor ate alone and left a plate warming on the stove for him. She was washing dishes when she heard the barn door slam, heard his uneven footsteps crossing the yard. But he didn't come inside. Instead, she heard him on the porch, pacing back and forth, like he couldn't decide whether to enter or run. Eleanor dried her hands and opened the door. Gideon was standing at the porch railing, staring out at the mountains. The sun was setting behind them, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "I don't see it anymore. I've lived here so long it's just scenery." He didn't look at her. "But you see it. You see beauty in everything, the mountains, the ranch, even me. I don't understand how. Because it's there. You just have to be willing to look for it." Gideon finally turned to face her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being the same, you and me. You're wrong about that." Eleanor's heart sank. "Am I?" "Yeah, because you're brave enough to keep trying, keep hoping, and I'm just a coward who's been hiding on a mountain for 20 years. You're not a coward. I am. I let fear run my life. Let it convince me that being alone was better than risking pain. And maybe that was true once, but..." He stopped, struggling with the words. "But then you showed up, and you didn't run when I was cruel. Didn't leave when I made it clear I didn't want you here. You just kept showing up, kept trying, kept being kind even when I didn't deserve it. And somewhere along the way, you stopped being an obligation and started being..." "What?" Eleanor whispered when he trailed off. "Necessary. You became necessary." He moved closer, his eyes searching her face. "I don't know what I'm doing here. Don't know how to be what you need. But I know I don't want you to leave. I know that when I think about 6 months from now, the only thing that terrifies me more than you staying is you going." Eleanor felt tears spill over. "So what do we do?" "I don't know. Maybe we start over. Maybe we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement and see what it could be instead." He reached out tentatively, touched her cheek. "Maybe I try to be brave enough to deserve you." "You already deserve me. You just have to believe it." Gideon pulled her into his arms then, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him and felt him shaking. "I'm going to mess this up," he said against her hair. "I'm going to be difficult and stubborn, and I'm probably going to push you away a dozen more times before I figure out how to do this right. I know, and I'm going to be here anyway." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, and Eleanor saw tears on his cheeks. "Why? Why are you willing to put up with me?" "Because underneath all the walls and the fear, I see who you really are, and that person is worth fighting for." Gideon kissed her then, tentative and uncertain, like he'd forgotten how. Eleanor kissed him back, gentle and patient, and felt something shift between them. The last of his walls didn't crumble. It would take more than one kiss to tear down 30 years of defenses. But they cracked a little wider, let a little more light in. When they finally broke apart, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise this will be easy. I don't want easy. I want real." Then real it is. They stood on the porch until the sun disappeared behind the mountains and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When they finally went inside, Gideon took Eleanor's hand and didn't let go, like he was afraid she might vanish if he did. Over the next few weeks, things changed slowly but steadily. Gideon started joining Eleanor for breakfast instead of eating alone. He played his harmonica in the evenings while she sewed by lamplight. They worked side by side on ranch chores, and he taught her things he'd never bothered to explain before. How to read the weather, how to tell when a cow was sick, how to mend harness leather. They still had bad days. Days when Gideon retreated into himself and Eleanor had to fight the urge to take it personally. Days when old fears resurfaced and he'd say something cutting, something designed to push her away. But now when that happened, Eleanor didn't let him run. She'd look him in the eye and say, "I'm still here. I'm not leaving. Try again." And he would. Slowly, painfully, he'd apologize and try to explain what had triggered the fear. And each time he did, the walls came down a little more. One evening, they were playing chess when Gideon suddenly spoke. "I want to show you something." He led her upstairs to his room, and Eleanor felt her heart beat faster. But he just walked to the trunk at the foot of his bed and opened it. Inside were folded clothes, a few books, and at the very bottom, a small wooden box. Gideon lifted out the box and sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for Eleanor to join him. Inside the box were photographs, old ones, faded and creased with age. "This was her," he said, holding up a picture of a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. "My mother, Sarah." Eleanor studied the photograph. Sarah looked young, maybe early 20s, standing in front of the ranch house when it still looked new. She was beautiful in a fragile sort of way, and there was something in her eyes that looked lost, even in the middle of smiling. "You look like her," Eleanor said. "I have her eyes," my father always said. Gideon pulled out another photograph, this one of a stern-looking man with his hand on a young boy's shoulder. "That's us, me and my father. This was taken maybe a year before she left." The boy in the photograph looked serious beyond his years, and the man's hand on his shoulder was possessive, almost desperate. Looking at it, Eleanor understood something new about what had happened in this house. "Your father loved her very much," she said carefully. "Too much, maybe. He needed her in a way that probably scared her. After she left, I remember him saying over and over, 'What did I do wrong? What could I have done different?' Like if he could just figure out the right answer, he could fix it." "But some things can't be fixed," Eleanor said softly. "Sometimes people leave for reasons that have nothing to do with the people they're leaving." "I know that now, but I didn't know it then. All I knew was that she'd looked at our life and found it wanting." Eleanor put her hand over his. "Or maybe she looked at herself and found herself wanting. Maybe she was running from her own pain, not from you or your father." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph. "I never thought about it that way. It's easier to blame yourself than to accept that sometimes there are no answers, no reasons that make sense." He put the photographs back in the box carefully, like they were fragile. "I kept these hidden for years. Couldn't look at them without feeling like I was 8 years old again, coming home to an empty house. But tonight, showing them to you, it hurt less than I expected. Maybe because you're not alone anymore." Gideon looked at her, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Something open and vulnerable and achingly honest. "No," he said. "I'm not alone anymore." He kissed her again, less tentative this time, and Eleanor felt the difference. This wasn't a man testing the waters. This was a man making a choice. When they broke apart, Gideon kept his arms around her. "Stay with me tonight. I'm not asking for anything except your company. I just don't want to be alone." Eleanor nodded and settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. They lay like that until late into the night, talking about everything and nothing. Gideon told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's quiet grief, about the years of crushing loneliness after he died. Eleanor told him about Philadelphia, about the boarding house where she'd worked, about the children she'd cared for and loved and had to give back. "You would have been a good mother," Gideon said quietly. "Maybe, but that's not the life I got." She looked up at him. "I used to be angry about it. Angry at my body for failing me, angry at the men who left because of it. But now I think maybe it happened that way for a reason. Maybe I was meant to be here instead." "You believe in fate?" "I believe in second chances. I believe people can find each other when they need each other most." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need you, Eleanor. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way you stopped being a stranger, living in my house, and started being the only thing that makes this place feel like home." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I need you too. More than I expected to, more than is probably wise. We're a pair of fools, aren't we? The best kind. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in Gideon's narrow bed. And when Eleanor woke in the gray light of dawn to find him still there, still holding her, she felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt like hope, like possibility. Like maybe the future didn't have to look like the past after all. The next morning, they woke to find another storm moving in. But this time, when Gideon went to secure the ranch, Eleanor worked beside him without being asked. They moved in sync now, understanding each other without words, and when they stumbled back into the house hours later, frozen and exhausted, they fell into an easy routine of warming each other up. "We make a good team," Gideon said, watching Eleanor make coffee. "We do. Maybe we could make it permanent." Eleanor's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "What are you saying?" Gideon crossed the kitchen to stand in front of her. "I'm saying I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I'm saying 6 months isn't enough. I'm saying..." He stopped, took a breath. "I'm saying I want you to stay. Not because of some legal requirement, but because you want to. Because this is your home now, too. Gideon, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out, but I also know I don't want to wake up one day and find you gone because the contract ran out and I was too stubborn to ask you to stay." Eleanor set down the coffee pot and took his hands. "You don't have to ask. I already decided weeks ago that I wasn't leaving. Even knowing I'm going to be difficult sometimes? Even knowing I'm still learning how to do this? Especially knowing that," she smiled. "We're both learning, Gideon, but we're learning together, and that's what matters." He pulled her close, and Eleanor felt his heart racing against her cheek. "I can't promise I'll be good at this. Can't promise I won't mess up or push you away when I get scared. And I can't promise I'll always be patient. Can't promise I won't want to throttle you when you're being stubborn. But I can promise I'll be here, through the good days and the bad ones, through the fear and the doubt and whatever else comes our way." "That's all I need," Gideon said, and Eleanor heard the wonder in his voice. "That's all I've ever needed." The storm hit that night, fiercer than the last one, and they spent 3 days snowed in together. But this time it felt different. This time, being trapped together didn't feel like a test or a trial. It felt like exactly where they were supposed to be. They cooked together, played chess, read by lamplight, and talked about the future. About what the ranch could be with both of them working it. About the garden Eleanor wanted to plant in the spring. About maybe getting a dog, or fixing up the upstairs rooms, or 100 other small dreams that added up to a life. And when the storm finally broke and the sun came out, turning the world into a crystal palace of ice and light, Gideon took Eleanor's hand and led her outside. "Look," he said, pointing to the mountains. "See how they catch the light?" Eleanor looked, and for the first time she saw what Gideon had stopped seeing years ago. The raw beauty of this place, the wild majesty of it. And she understood why someone could choose to build a life here, even knowing how hard it would be. "It's worth it," she said. "All of it. The cold and the isolation and the hard work. It's worth it for moments like this." Gideon turned to look at her, and there were tears on his face again. But this time they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were something else entirely. "You gave this back to me," he said. "The ability to see beauty again, to feel something other than emptiness. I didn't think that was possible. It was always there. You just needed someone to remind you." He kissed her there in the snow, with the mountains watching and the sun turning everything to gold. And Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty, that she was finally home. That evening, as they sat by the fire with mugs of hot cider, Gideon cleared his throat in a way that made Eleanor look up from the sock she was darning. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, staring into the flames, "about the legal arrangement, the 6 months." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What about it?" It was a lie. He finally met her eyes. "There's no law requiring mail-order marriages to live together for 6 months. I made that up." Eleanor set down her darning. "You what?" "The lawyer told me I needed to be honest about what I was offering. Make sure any woman who came here knew what she was getting into. But I couldn't stand the thought of someone showing up expecting romance and finding me instead. So I told him to put in the advertisement that it was purely practical, and I added the 6-month thing myself. Figured if someone could last that long, maybe they'd actually stay. So all this time, you've been free to leave whenever you wanted.
The marriage became legal the day we signed the papers in front of the magistrate. He looked down at his hands. I kept waiting for you to realize that, to figure out there was nothing keeping you here except your own stubbornness. Eleanor didn't know whether to laugh or throw something at him. You let me believe I was trapped here for half a year when I could have left any time. Would you have? Left, I mean.
She opened her mouth to say yes, of course she would have, then stopped. Because the truth was, she hadn't wanted to leave. Not after the first week, not after the first month. She'd stayed because she'd chosen to, not because any law required it. No, she admitted. I wouldn't have. I know. I figured that out after the first storm, when you kept finding reasons to stay even when I was giving you every excuse to go. He shifted in his chair. I'm telling you now because I don't want any more lies between us. You should know you're free to leave whenever you want. The ranch share I promised you, it's yours legally. You could sell it back to me tomorrow and walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you choose. Is that what you want?
Hell no, it's not what I want. But it's what you deserve to know. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I spent so many years being afraid of people leaving that I tried to control when and how it happened. Figured if I set the terms, it would hurt less when they went. But that's not fair to you. You deserve the choice.
Eleanor moved to kneel in front of him, taking his hands.
I choose to stay, not because of any contract or legal obligation. I choose you, Gideon. I choose this life. He pulled her up onto his lap, buried his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. We deserve each other. We both deserve happiness after everything we've been through.
They stayed like that until the fire burned low, and when they finally went to bed, it was to Gideon's room without discussion. This was where Eleanor belonged now, and they both knew it. The next morning brought a surprise. They were eating breakfast when they heard horses outside, and Gideon's head snapped up. Who the hell? He went to the window and cursed. Eleanor joined him and saw 3 riders approaching through the snow, leading a pack horse. Who are they?
Dutch and 2 men from town. This can't be good. They bundled up and went outside. Dutch dismounted and tipped his hat to Eleanor, but his expression was grim. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer. He glanced between them. We need to talk. About what? About the bet. Dutch looked uncomfortable. Town had money on how long Mrs. Mercer would last up here. Most folks put their cash on less than a month. But it's been near 2 months now, and people are starting to talk. Let them talk, Gideon said flatly. It ain't that simple. Some folks are saying it's not fair that you're keeping her here against her will to win the bet. There's talk of sending the sheriff up to check on her. Eleanor felt anger surge through her. I'm standing right here. You could ask me yourself instead of talking about me like I'm not present. Dutch had the grace to look ashamed. You're right, ma'am. I apologize. Are you here of your own free will? I am. He treating you right? You got everything you need? I have everything I need and more.
And Gideon treats me better than any man I've ever known. The 2 men with Dutch exchanged glances. One of them, a grizzled prospector named Hayes, spat tobacco juice in the snow. That's all well and good, ma'am, but you'll forgive us for being skeptical. 4 women before you didn't last, and Mercer's got a reputation for being colder than a witch's. Watch your mouth, Gideon cut him off, his voice dangerous. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You ain't exactly known for your warm personality.
Eleanor stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, is it? Let me make something very clear. I came to this ranch of my own free will. I've stayed of my own free will. And I'll leave if and when I choose to. Not because of any bet, not because of town gossip, and certainly not because you or anyone else thinks they know what's best for me. Is that clear enough? Hayes looked startled. Yes, ma'am. Good. Now, is there anything else, or can we get back to our breakfast? Dutch cleared his throat. Actually, ma'am, there is one more thing. We brought supplies. Figured you might be running low after being snowed in so long. He gestured to the pack horse, loaded down with goods. Eleanor saw flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and even some fresh vegetables that must have cost a fortune this time of year. We didn't order supplies, Gideon said. I know. Town took up a collection. Figured if Mrs. Mercer really is staying, she might appreciate some proper provisions. Dutch pulled an envelope from his coat. And there's this, letter from the magistrate in Black Hollow. Come for you, Mrs. Mercer. Eleanor took the envelope with trembling hands.
Inside was an official-looking document and a short note. She read it twice, then looked up at Gideon with tears in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, concern flooding his face. "It's from my aunt, my mother's sister. I wrote to her when I first arrived, told her I was getting married." Eleanor's voice shook. "She died 3 months ago, left me her house in Denver and $5,000. The clearing went silent except for the sound of wind through the trees. $5,000 was a fortune. More than enough for Eleanor to leave, to start over anywhere she wanted. She could see the calculation happening in Gideon's eyes, watched the fear creep back into his expression. "That's wonderful news, ma'am," Dutch said carefully. "You'll be well set up now."
Eleanor folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. "Yes. It means I'll have money to invest in the ranch. Maybe buy some more cattle in the spring, repair the barn roof that's been worrying Gideon." Gideon stared at her. "Eleanor, unless you have objections to me investing in our ranch." The emphasis on our maid Dutch's eyebrows rise. Gideon just looked at her like he'd never seen her before. "No objections," he said hoarsely. Dutch and his companions left shortly after unloading the supplies, and Eleanor watched them ride away with a sense of satisfaction. Let the town gossip about that. She turned to find Gideon still standing in the snow, the envelope clutched in his hand. "You could leave," he said. "You have the money now. Could go to Denver, live in a real city, have everything you gave up to come here." "I gave up nothing to come here. I left behind an empty life and found a full one." Eleanor walked to him, took the envelope from his hands. "This money doesn't change anything, except now we can make the ranch into what it should be, what it could have been if your father had the resources." "You're really staying?" "How many times do I have to say it before you believe me?" Gideon pulled her close. "Maybe 1,000 more. Maybe forever. I can do forever." They spent the afternoon making plans for the money. Gideon was hesitant at first, unused to having resources to work with. But Eleanor coaxed ideas out of him. New breeding stock for the cattle, seeds for the garden she wanted, repairs to the house and barn, maybe even hiring a hand or two come spring. "We could have a real ranch," Gideon said, wonder in his voice. "Not just surviving, but thriving. Build something worth passing down." "Passing down to who?" He looked at her, and Eleanor saw the question in his eyes. They hadn't talked about children, about the future beyond the two of them. "I can't have children," Eleanor said quietly. "I told you before, but I don't know if you heard me. The doctor said it's not possible." "I heard you?" Gideon took her hand. "And I don't care. You're enough for me, Eleanor, more than enough. If we want children someday, there are other ways, orphanages full of kids who need homes. But if it's just the two of us for the rest of our lives, that's fine too." Eleanor felt tears spill over. "You mean that?" Every word. That night, they made love for the first time, slow and tentative, and nothing like Eleanor had imagined. It was awkward and sweet and perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Gideon traced patterns on her shoulder. "I want to marry you," he said suddenly. Eleanor laughed. "We are married." "No, I mean really marry you, in front of the whole town, with you in a white dress if you want one, with vows that mean something. The first marriage was legal paperwork. I want the second one to be real." "It's all been real, Gideon, from the moment I decided to stay." "I know, but I want everyone to know it. Want them to see that you chose me, that we chose each other." He propped himself up on one elbow. "Will you marry me again, Eleanor Vale? Will you stand up in front of the town that bet against us and prove them all wrong?" Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." The wedding was planned for late winter before the spring thaw made travel impossible. Eleanor wrote to a dressmaker in Denver, used some of her inheritance to order a proper wedding dress. Gideon cleaned up the house until it shone, fixed every broken thing, painted the shutters a cheerful blue that made Eleanor laugh with delight. "It looks like a home now," she said, standing back to admire it. "It is a home now. You made it one." The transformation wasn't just in the house. Gideon smiled more, laughed at Eleanor's terrible jokes, played his harmonica most evenings. He taught her to ride properly, to shoot a rifle, to read the mountain weather. In turn, she taught him to cook something besides jerked meat and beans, to appreciate the small pleasures of a well-set table, to let himself be cared for. They still fought.
Gideon still had moments when he retreated into himself, when old fears made him lash out. Eleanor still got frustrated with his stubbornness, still wanted to shake him when he refused help. But they were learning to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to forgive each other's failings.
"We're not perfect," Eleanor said one night after a particularly heated argument about whether to buy chickens or another cow.
"No," Gideon agreed, "but we're perfect for each other." 2 weeks before the wedding, they made the trip to Black Hollow together. It was Eleanor's first time back in town since she'd arrived, and people stared openly as Gideon helped her down from the wagon. "Ignore them," he muttered. "Let them look. I don't care." They went to the general store first, and the proprietor's wife nearly dropped the bolt of fabric she was holding when she saw them. "Mrs. Mercer, we heard you were still up at the ranch, but I hardly believed it." "Still there and planning to stay," Eleanor said pleasantly. "We need supplies for the wedding. Sugar, flour, coffee, enough for 50 guests." 50? The woman's eyes went wide. "You're inviting the whole town?" "Anyone who wants to come. We're getting married properly this time, and we'd like to share it with the community." Word spread through town like wildfire. By the time Eleanor and Gideon left the general store, people were stopping them on the street to congratulate them, to say they'd be at the wedding, to remark on how well Eleanor looked. "You're glowing, dear," one old woman said, patting Eleanor's hand. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "It does," Eleanor said, smiling at Gideon. "It really does." At the saloon, Dutch bought them drinks and cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Mercer, both of you. I was one of the ones who bet you wouldn't last a month, Mrs. Mercer. Lost $20 on that bet, and I've never been happier to lose money." "Why's that?" Gideon asked. "Because it means there's hope for the rest of us, sorry bastards. If you can find happiness, maybe anyone can." Other men gathered around, and soon Gideon was surrounded by old acquaintances he'd been avoiding for years. Eleanor watched him handle it, saw how uncomfortable he was with the attention, but how he didn't retreat the way he would have months ago. He was trying, pushing himself beyond his comfort zone, because it mattered to Eleanor. She was talking with some of the town women when she heard a commotion at the bar. Gideon's voice rose above the others, sharp with anger. "That's not true, and you know it, Briggs." Eleanor pushed through the crowd to find Gideon facing down a burly man she didn't recognize. "What's going on?" she asked. "Nothing," Gideon said tightly. "I just asked how much he paid you to stay," Briggs said with a nasty smile. "Everyone knows no woman would put up with Mercer unless she was getting paid well." The room went silent. Eleanor felt fury rise in her chest, hot and righteous. "You're right," she said calmly. "No woman would put up with him. They'd need to see past his rough exterior to the good man underneath. They'd need patience and courage and the ability to look deeper than surface appearances. Clearly, that's beyond your capabilities, Mr. Briggs." Briggs's face turned red. "Now see here. Ski..." "No, you see here. Gideon Mercer is worth 10 of you, and I'm lucky to have him, not the other way around. And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me outside." Dutch started laughing, and soon others joined in. Briggs looked around at the crowd, realized he was outnumbered, and stalked out of the saloon. Gideon was staring at Eleanor with something like awe. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Nobody talks about my husband that way." He kissed her right there in the middle of the saloon, and the whole room erupted in cheers. They spent the night at the town's only boarding house, and Eleanor woke to find Gideon already dressed, staring out the window at the mountains. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "About the wedding?" "No. About deserving you? Always." He turned to look at her. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream. That you're not real, that none of this is real." Eleanor got out of bed and went to him. "It's real. I'm real. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to stand up in front of everyone and promise to spend the rest of my life with you. You'd better start believing it." "I'm trying." "Try harder." He smiled at that, pulled her close. "Yes, ma'am." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor scrubbed the house from top to bottom, made curtains for every window, planted bulbs in boxes that would bloom in the spring. Gideon repaired the barn, built new fencing, and worked from dawn until dark, making sure everything was perfect. The night before the wedding, Eleanor stood in the kitchen looking around at everything they'd built together.
The room that had been cold and empty when she arrived now felt warm and alive. Copper pots gleamed on the walls, curtains fluttered in the windows, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Gideon found her there, tears running down her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's what scares me." He understood immediately. "You're waiting for it to fall apart, aren't you?" "Every day. But it hasn't yet, and maybe it won't. Maybe we get to keep this." Eleanor turned into his arms. "I love you. I don't think I've said it enough. You say it every day, in 100 different ways.
I want to say it with words, too. I love you, Gideon Mercer. I love your stubborn pride and your terrible coffee and the way you gentle a scared calf. I love how hard you try, even when you're terrified. I love the man you are and the man you're becoming." Gideon's eyes were wet. "I love you, too. I love your strength and your patience and how you refuse to give up on things. I love that you see beauty where I see emptiness. I love that you made this house a home and made me feel like I deserve one." They held each other in the kitchen while snow fell outside. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful from broken pieces. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed in her room alone, struggling with the buttons on her dress until there was a knock on the door. "Need help?" Gideon's voice. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony." "I've seen you every day for months. I think we can break that rule." Eleanor opened the door, and Gideon's breath caught. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk that made her skin glow. She'd put her hair up, and a few curls framed her face. "You're beautiful," he said. "You're not so bad yourself." He'd gotten a new suit for the occasion, black with a white shirt that made his pale eyes even more striking. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, kept tugging at the collar. "Stop fidgeting," Eleanor said, fixing his tie. "You look handsome." "I look like I'm going to a funeral." "Our wedding, Gideon. You're going to our wedding." He caught her hands. "Best day of my life." They rode to town together in the wagon, the mountain standing guard around them. When they arrived at the small church, people were already gathering. Eleanor recognized faces from her brief trip to town, saw Dutch and Hayes and even Briggs lurking in the back. The ceremony itself was simple. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about choosing each other every day. When it came time for vows, Gideon's hands shook as he took Eleanor's. "I'm not good with words," he started. "Just speak from your heart," Eleanor whispered. He took a breath. "Eleanor, you saw something in me nobody else did. You looked past the walls I built and found the man I'd forgotten I could be. You made me believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in the possibility that maybe I wasn't meant to be alone forever. I promise to honor that gift every day. I promise to try to be the man you see when you look at me. I promise to love you through the hard winters and the bright springs and everything in between. You're my home, Eleanor. You always will be." Eleanor was crying before he finished. When it was her turn, she had to wait for her voice to steady. "Gideon, when I came to this mountain, I thought I was coming to survive. I thought this would be a practical arrangement, nothing more. But you taught me the difference between surviving and living. You showed me that love isn't always gentle or easy, but it's always worth fighting for. I promise to be patient when you're scared, to push you when you need pushing, and to stand beside you through whatever comes. You're not alone anymore, Gideon. You never will be again." The minister pronounced them married, and Gideon kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The church erupted in applause. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, and it seemed like everyone in Black Hollow turned out. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and toast after toast to the couple nobody thought would last. Dutch stood up, glass in hand. "I've known Gideon Mercer for 20 years, and I've never seen him smile the way he smiles at his wife. To Eleanor, who proved us all wrong, and to Gideon, who finally let someone in." "Hear, hear!" the crowd shouted. Eleanor danced with Gideon, and he was terrible at it, stepping on her toes and apologizing every few seconds. But he was trying, and that's what mattered. "I think this might be the happiest day of my life," Eleanor said. "Might be? Definitely is." As the sun set and the party wound down, Eleanor and Gideon prepared to head back to the ranch. People lined up to wish them well, to hug Eleanor and shake Gideon's hand. The last person in line was an old woman Eleanor didn't recognize. She took Eleanor's hands and looked at her intently. You did it, child. You stayed. Do you know what that means to people here? I don't understand. It means hope. It means that even the hardest hearts can soften. Even the loneliest souls can find home. She turned to Gideon. Your mother would be proud of you, boy. You became a better man than the one who raised you. Before either of them could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd. Who was that? Eleanor asked. I don't know, but she was right about one thing. What's that? Gideon helped Eleanor into the wagon. I did become a better man, because of you. They rode home through the darkness, the mountains black silhouettes against a star-filled sky. When they reached the ranch, Gideon carried Eleanor over the threshold of their home, and they stood in the kitchen holding each other. We did it, Eleanor said. We're just getting started. Spring came slowly to the mountains, as if winter didn't want to let go. But Eleanor noticed the changes first. The way the light lasted a few minutes longer each evening, how the snow began to melt in patches near the barn, revealing brown earth that seemed impossibly alive after months of white. She was standing on the porch one morning in early March, coffee steaming in her hands, when Gideon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. The garden. I want to start planning where everything will go. It's still freezing at night. Nothing will grow for weeks yet. I know, but I like thinking about it. Imagining what it'll look like when the roses climb up the porch, when we have fresh vegetables again. She leaned back against him. Do you think I'm crazy for being excited about dirt and seeds? No. I think you're the sanest person I've ever met. He kissed the top of her head. And I think you see possibility where I only saw work. That afternoon, they walked the perimeter of the house together, Eleanor pointing out where she wanted to plant what. Gideon listened, occasionally offering suggestions about drainage or sun exposure, but mostly just watching her talk with that look on his face that still made Eleanor's heart skip. What? She asked, catching him staring. Nothing. Just thinking how different this place looks through your eyes. Different how? Alive. Like it has a future instead of just a past. They were marking out the garden beds when they heard a wagon approaching. Gideon's hand went automatically to the rifle he'd started carrying less often, then relaxed when he recognized the driver. It was Dutch, and he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman maybe 60 years old, dressed in traveling clothes that had seen better days, and in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 12. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer. Dutch tipped his hat. Sorry to come unannounced, but we got a situation. Gideon's jaw tightened. What kind of situation? The older woman climbed down from the wagon carefully, her movements stiff. Mr. Mercer, my name is Martha Wells. This is my granddaughter, Lily. We just came from Denver, and we're looking for a place to stay until we can get on our feet. This isn't a boarding house, Gideon said, but Eleanor could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Martha's face fell. I know. Dutch said you might not be willing, but I had to try. Lily's parents died of fever last month. I'm all she has left, and I'm too old to work much anymore. We were living in a tenement in Denver, but I couldn't afford the rent after my daughter passed. We've been on the road for 2 weeks. Eleanor moved to the wagon and looked at the girl. Lily stared back with huge dark eyes and a too thin face. She was shivering despite the blankets, and Eleanor could see the signs of a fever flush on her cheeks. She's sick, Eleanor said. Just a cold, Martha said quickly. She'll be fine once she warms up and gets some food in her. Eleanor looked at Gideon. He was standing rigid, his expression unreadable. She knew what he was thinking, that opening their home to strangers was asking for trouble, that they'd barely figured out how to be married themselves, that taking on someone else's problems was foolish. But Eleanor also saw the way his eyes kept going to the girl in the wagon, saw him swallow hard. Gideon, Eleanor said softly. Look at her. He did. And Eleanor watched something shift in his face. Bring her inside, he said gruffly. You too, Mrs. Wells. We'll get you both warm and fed, then we'll talk. Dutch helped get Lily into the house while Eleanor settled Martha in the kitchen. The old woman's hands shook as she accepted the coffee Eleanor poured, and tears ran down her weathered face. Thank you. You don't know what this means. Don't thank us yet, Gideon said, carrying Lily upstairs. We haven't agreed to anything permanent, but Eleanor knew her husband better than that now. She'd seen the look on his face when he'd picked up the girl, the same gentleness he showed the frightened animals, the same careful tenderness. She followed him upstairs and found him laying Lily in the guest room bed, tucking blankets around her with surprising care. "She needs a doctor," Eleanor said. "Closest one is in Black Hollow, 3-hour ride." "Then you'd better get going." Gideon looked at her. "You're sure about this? Are you?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the girl's forehead. "She's burning up. Reminds me of myself at that age. After my mother left, I got sick. Fever so bad I hallucinated for days. My father didn't know what to do with me, just kept working and hoping I'd get better on my own." "But you did get better, because a neighbor woman took pity on us. Came up to the ranch every day for a week, nursed me back to health. My father never even thanked her." He looked at Eleanor. "I don't want to be that man, the one who's too proud or too scared to accept help or give it." Eleanor took his hand. "Then go get the doctor. I'll take care of things here." By the time Gideon returned with the doctor 6 hours later, Eleanor had learned Martha's whole story. How her daughter had married young, had moved to Denver chasing better opportunities. How the fever had swept through their neighborhood, taking both parents within days of each other. How Martha had sold everything she owned to pay for the funerals and still came up short. "We have nowhere else to go," Martha said, staring into her tea. "I have a sister in California, but I don't have money for train tickets. I thought maybe I could find work here, save up enough to get us there. But every place I asked said I was too old, and nobody wants a sick child around." The doctor examined Lily and came downstairs looking grave. "Pneumonia. She needs rest, warm food, and constant care. If she'd gone much longer without treatment, she might not have made it." After the doctor left, Eleanor and Gideon stood in the kitchen while Martha dozed in a chair and Lily slept upstairs. "We can't send them away," Eleanor said. "I know. They could stay here, just until Lily's well and Martha saves enough for California." Gideon was quiet, and Eleanor could see him wrestling with it. What if they don't want to go to California? What if they want to stay? Would that be so terrible? This house, this ranch. It's ours, Eleanor. Our fresh start. Bringing other people into it, letting them depend on us. What if we can't handle it? Eleanor moved closer. Or what if we can? What if this is exactly what we're supposed to do with the space we have, the resources we have? You said yourself you wanted to build something worth passing down. Maybe this is part of that. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But so is me staying here, and look how that turned out. Gideon pulled her close. "You're going to be the death of my carefully constructed walls." "Good. You don't need them anymore." They let Martha and Lily stay. The first few days were hard. Lily's fever spiked twice, and Eleanor spent nights at her bedside with cool cloths and quiet words. Martha tried to help, but was clearly exhausted, and Eleanor insisted she rest. "You've been taking care of everyone else," Eleanor told her. "Let someone take care of you for once." Slowly, Lily began to improve. Her fever broke, her color returned, and one morning Eleanor came into her room to find her sitting up and looking around with curiosity. "Where am I?" Lily asked, her voice hoarse. "You're at the Mercer Ranch, in the mountains. Your grandmother brought you here." "Are you Mrs. Mercer?" "I am. You can call me Eleanor." Lily studied her with those huge dark eyes. "Grandma said you were nice, that you took us in even though you didn't have to." "Everyone needs help sometimes. My mama used to say that before she died." Lily's face crumpled, and Eleanor gathered her into her arms, letting her cry. The girl sobbed into Eleanor's shoulder, great heaving cries that shook her thin frame. When the tears finally subsided, Lily pulled back and wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You've been through something terrible. You're allowed to cry. Grandma says I need to be strong, that we can't impose on your kindness." Eleanor smoothed the girl's hair back. "You're not imposing, and being strong doesn't mean not crying. It means crying when you need to and then getting up the next day and trying again." Over the next few weeks, as Lily recovered, the dynamics of the household shifted. Martha proved invaluable in the kitchen, teaching Eleanor recipes she'd never heard of and taking over the bread making with practiced ease. Lily, once she was well enough to be up and around, followed Gideon everywhere like a shadow. "She's attached to you," Eleanor observed one evening. Gideon looked uncomfortable. "She just asks a lot of questions.
She sees you the way I do, as someone kind under all the gruffness. I'm not kind. I just don't know how to tell a 12-year-old to leave me alone. But Eleanor noticed how Gideon answered Lily's endless questions about the ranch, how he showed her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how he carved her a small wooden bird one evening and pretended it was nothing when she squealed with delight. One afternoon, Eleanor found them in the barn together. Gideon was showing Lily how to brush down one of the horses, and the girl was chattering away about everything and nothing. My papa used to take me riding in the park, Lily said. Before he got sick, he said I was a natural. You want to learn to ride properly? Gideon asked. Ranch riding, not park riding? Lily's face lit up. Really? You'd teach me? If your grandmother says it's all right. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Gideon helped Lily onto the gentlest horse, watched him patiently explain how to hold the reins, how to sit, how to communicate with the animal. He was patient in a way she'd never seen him be, and Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. That evening, after Lily and Martha had gone to bed, Eleanor and Gideon sat on the porch watching the stars come out. You're good with her, Eleanor said. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody does. That's the secret of parenting. Everyone's just making it up as they go. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about what would have happened to me if that neighbor woman hadn't helped when I was sick. If someone hadn't cared enough to step in when my father was too lost in his own grief to notice I was dying. You want them to stay, don't you? Is that crazy? We've only known them a few weeks. Eleanor took his hand. It's not crazy. It's human. They need us, and maybe we need them too. Martha mentioned the other day that she always wanted to live in the mountains. That California was her daughter's dream, not hers. What did you say? I said we had plenty of space if she wanted to stay, that we could use help around the ranch. He looked at Eleanor. Was that wrong? Should I have talked to you first? No, you did exactly right. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. I think we're building a family, Gideon. Maybe not the traditional kind, but a family nonetheless. You're not disappointed? That it's not just the two of us? No, I think maybe this is better. I think maybe we were meant to make room for people who need it. 2 months later, Martha and Lily were still there, and it was clear they weren't leaving. Martha had taken over most of the cooking and helped Eleanor with the garden that was finally starting to sprout. Lily was thriving. She'd gained weight, her cheeks were pink with health, and she could ride well enough that Gideon trusted her to help check the fence lines. One evening, they all sat down to dinner together, and Eleanor looked around the table at her unlikely family. Martha was telling a story about her childhood, making Lily laugh. Gideon was smiling, actually smiling, as he passed the potatoes. This was what Eleanor had imagined when she'd first seen the ranch house. Not the empty rooms and cold silence, but this, warmth and laughter, and the sound of people who cared about each other sharing a meal. I have an announcement, Martha said, setting down her fork. I've written to my sister in California, told her we're staying here, if that's still all right with you both. More than all right, Eleanor said. This is your home now, if you want it to be. Lily jumped up and hugged Eleanor so hard she nearly knocked her out of her chair. Really? We can stay forever? As long as you want. That night, as Eleanor and Gideon got ready for bed, he was quieter than usual. What's on your mind? Eleanor asked. I've been thinking about making it official. Lily and Martha staying, I mean. He sat on the edge of the bed. I want to talk to a lawyer about legal guardianship. Make sure Lily's taken care of if anything happens to Martha. Make sure they both have a claim to this place. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. You want to adopt her? Is that presumptuous? We've only known her a few months. It's not presumptuous, it's perfect. Eleanor moved to stand in front of him. You know what this means, though? It means we're really doing this, building a life that includes other people, opening ourselves up to being needed. Terrifying, Gideon agreed, but in a good way. The legal arrangements took time, but by midsummer, Martha was officially employed as their housekeeper with a fair wage and a room of her own, and Gideon and Eleanor had begun the process of becoming Lily's legal guardians. The garden Eleanor had dreamed about was thriving. Roses climbed the porch just as she'd imagined, and vegetables grew in neat rows behind the house. The ranch itself was prospering too. The new cattle Gideon had bought with Eleanor's inheritance were healthy, and they'd hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload.
One of those hands was a young man named Thomas who'd come west looking for work. The other was Hayes, the grizzled prospector from town who'd finally admitted he was too old to spend winters in the mountains alone. "Never thought I'd see the day when Mercer's ranch was a gathering place," Hayes said one afternoon, watching Martha and Lily shell peas on the porch while Eleanor hung laundry. "Times change," Gideon said. "People change." "You sure did, in a good way." It wasn't all smooth. There were hard days when Lily woke crying for her parents, when Martha's arthritis flared up and she couldn't work, when the ranch hands disagreed about something and needed Gideon to mediate. There were nights when Eleanor and Gideon fell into bed exhausted, wondering if they'd taken on too much. But there were more good days than bad. Days when Lily's laugh echoed through the house, when Martha's cooking filled the kitchen with smells that made everyone's mouths water, when the ranch hands worked together like a well-oiled machine, when Eleanor and Gideon stole moments alone and remembered why they'd chosen this life. In late summer, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the signs for a week before she believed them, remembering what the doctors had told her years ago. It shouldn't be possible, but her body insisted otherwise. She told Gideon one evening after everyone else had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch, and she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Gideon went completely still. "But the doctor said," "I know what they said, but apparently my body didn't get the message." "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed 2 months now and I'm sick every morning. Martha's already guessed, I think." Gideon's hand trembled against her stomach. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified, excited, grateful?" Eleanor covered his hand with hers. "How do you feel?" "The same. All of it." He pulled her close. "What if something goes wrong? What if the doctors were right and this is dangerous for you? Then we'll handle it together." "But Gideon, this is a miracle. After everything we've been through, after all the ways life has disappointed both of us, this is something beautiful happening. You're something beautiful happening." The pregnancy wasn't easy. Eleanor was sick constantly for the first few months, and there were scares that sent Gideon riding for the doctor in the middle of the night. But Eleanor was strong, and her body proved the doctors wrong month after month. Lily was over the moon about the baby. She followed Eleanor around asking endless questions and demanding to feel the baby kick the moment it started moving. "What if it's a girl?" Lily asked one afternoon. "Can I help take care of her?" "Of course you can. You'll be her big sister." "Really? I'll really be a sister?"
Eleanor saw the hunger in the girl's eyes, the need to belong to something. "Really? Your family, Lily. This baby will be your brother or sister just as much as if you'd been born to us." Lily threw her arms around Eleanor's expanding waist. "I love you, Eleanor." "I love you too, sweetheart." Winter came again, but this year it felt different. The house was full of life and warmth. The wood box was always stocked. The pantry was bursting with Martha's preserves and pickles from the garden, and there was always someone to talk to, always laughter echoing through the rooms that had once been so silent. Gideon still had his moments of retreat, times when the old fears crept back in. But now when he started to pull away, Eleanor didn't let him. She'd follow him to wherever he'd gone to brood and sit quietly until he was ready to talk. "What if I'm a terrible father?" he asked one night, his hand on Eleanor's swollen belly. "You won't be." "How do you know?" "Because you're already a good father to Lily. Because I see how gentle you are with the animals, how patient you've become. Because you care, Gideon. That's all it takes. Caring and trying and showing up every day. I never had a good example. My father was so lost in his grief he barely saw me." "Then you'll be different. You'll be present. You'll let this child know every day that they're loved and wanted." The baby came in early spring, just as the first flowers were pushing through the last of the snow. Eleanor's labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Gideon was convinced he was going to lose her. He paced the hallway outside their bedroom while the midwife from town worked, while Martha helped, while Lily sat on the stairs praying to whoever might be listening. But Eleanor was tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She'd survived heartbreak and loneliness and a winter on a mountain ranch. She could survive this too. When the baby's first cry filled the house, Gideon burst into the room to find Eleanor exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "It's a boy," she said. "Come meet your son." Gideon approached slowly, like he was afraid the moment might shatter. He looked down at the red-faced infant and felt something crack open in his chest.
a well of feeling so deep he couldn't name it. "He's perfect," Gideon whispered. "He's ours." They named him James, after Eleanor's father. Lily was instantly smitten, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to the midnight feedings. Martha knitted blankets and caps and cooed over the baby like he was the first one ever born. Hayes and Thomas took turns bringing gifts, a carved rattle, a small pair of boots made for a child who wouldn't walk for months yet. Even Dutch rode up from town to deliver a silver spoon with the baby's name engraved on it. "For the boy who proved Mercer had a heart after all," Dutch said with a grin. The ranch continued to grow. By the time James was 6 months old, they had nearly 200 head of cattle, a chicken coop that Eleanor had expanded twice, and a barn cat that Lily had claimed as her own. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, and Martha had started selling her preserves in town, earning money she saved meticulously for Lily's future. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Eleanor stood on the porch with James on her hip, watching Gideon teach Lily to rope fence posts. Martha was singing in the kitchen, and the ranch hands were finishing up the day's work. This was the life she dreamed of but never thought she'd have. A home filled with love and laughter. A husband who'd learned to open his heart. A daughter who'd found safety and family. A son who would grow up knowing he was wanted. Gideon caught her watching and smiled. That full, genuine smile that still took her breath away. He said something to Lily, then walked over to Eleanor and wrapped his arms around both her and James. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible." "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving when everyone else saw a lost cause. You were never a lost cause. Just a man who needed someone stubborn enough to stick around long enough to see the truth." James made a sleepy sound, and Eleanor rocked him gently. In the kitchen, Martha was still singing. In the yard, Lily was laughing as her rope went wide of the mark again. The mountains stood eternal around them, no longer a prison of isolation, but a protective embrace. "You know what the best part is?" Gideon said. "What?" "This is just the beginning. We have years ahead of us. Years of watching James grow, of seeing Lily become whoever she's meant to be. Years of building this ranch into something that will last beyond us." Eleanor leaned into him. Years of proving that broken things can be mended, that lonely people can find each other, that it's never too late for a second chance. "You sound like you're writing the ending to a story." "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm writing the beginning of a new one." As darkness fell, they went inside together, into the warmth and light of the home they'd built. The house that had once been empty and cold was now alive with voices and laughter. The ranch that had been a place of isolation was now a community, a family. And in the years that followed, that's what it became. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Lily blossomed into a young woman who eventually married Thomas and built her own house on the eastern edge of the property. Martha lived to see her great-grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep one winter night with a smile on her face. Gideon never fully lost his quiet nature, but he learned to let people in. He learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that asking for help didn't make him less of a man, that opening his heart was the bravest thing he'd ever done. And Eleanor proved that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stay. Stay when things are hard. Stay when it would be easier to leave. Stay and fight for what could be instead of running from what is. The town stopped talking about the woman who'd finally tamed Gideon Mercer. Instead, they talked about the ranch that had become a haven for people who needed one. About the couple who'd proven that love didn't have to look like the storybooks to be real. About the family that had been built not from blood, but from choice and commitment and the simple act of showing up every day. Years later, when people asked Eleanor how she'd done it, how she'd survived that first winter, how she'd broken through Gideon's walls, how she'd built a life in such a harsh and unforgiving place, she always gave the same answer. "I just refused to give up. On him, on myself, on the possibility that two broken people might be able to build something whole together." And when they asked if it had been worth it, she'd smile and look around at the life they'd created, at the ranch that thrived, at the family that had grown from just two lonely people into something beautiful and complicated and real. "Every moment," she'd say, "every single moment." Because in the end, that's what love was. Not the easy moments when everything was perfect, but the hard moments when you chose to stay anyway. When you chose to see the good in someone even when they couldn't see it in themselves. When you chose to build something new from broken pieces and refused to accept that broken meant forever. The mountains would always be harsh. Winters would always be brutal. Life would throw challenges at them that tested everything they'd built. But Eleanor and Gideon had learned the most important lesson, that together they could weather any storm. That home wasn't a place. It was the people you chose to stand beside when the world got cold. And as the sun set over the mountains one last time, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, the light in the ranch house windows burned bright and steady. A beacon that said what Eleanor had known from the very beginning. Some lights, once lit, refused to go out. Some hearts, once opened, stay that way. And some love stories start with fear and loneliness and doubt, but end with a simple truth, that the bravest thing you can ever do is let someone love you and love them back with everything you have. The woman who everyone said wouldn't last had stayed, and in staying, she'd taught a broken man how to hope again. Together, they'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy. Not just a marriage, but a family. Not just a house, but a home. And that was worth every cold winter, every hard day, every moment of doubt. It was worth everything.